Even if your English is fantastic, not being confident may reduce your IELTS speaking score. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 7 tips to help you be more confident and natural in the IELTS speaking test. But before we get started, if you want a step-by-step plan for how to get a band 7 in IELTS, make sure you check out our full course in the description below. Obviously, if you know how to get a band 7 in each part, that's definitely going to improve your confidence. All right, so the first thing we need to talk about is that confidence can be improved. So a lot of students think that confidence is something you're either born with or you're not. And yeah, maybe some people might naturally feel more confident, but that doesn't mean you can't improve your confidence, because confidence grows when you practice, when you get better at something, and when you become more competent. Competent just means being good enough at something to do it well. So that's the first thing you really need to get into your head. You can improve and you can get better. There's probably a reason why you're not feeling confident. I mean, just pretend that you're an educated, fluent, native English speaker. You would probably feel quite confident with your English, right? So what can you do to improve your confidence? Well, let's start with the first thing, which is improve your general English. This is one of the simplest and easiest things you can do to start feeling more confident. If your English isn't good, well, you'll probably never feel confident. And that makes sense, right? I mean, if you can't do something well, it's completely natural to not feel confident. So what you need to do is start with strong, basic English skills. So that includes things like vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. If you can't do these basic things well, it's probably going to be quite hard for you to speak English and to get a good score in the speaking test. Now, after you get good with the basics, that's when you can start moving on to more advanced English. For example, less common vocabulary, higher level grammar structures, connected speech for pronunciation. So what should you focus on to improve your general English for the speaking test? Well, there are 4 main things. The first one is fluency. So to improve your fluency, you need to practice speaking regularly. If you only speak English once a week or once every month, well, your fluency is probably not going to be that good. And you need to really focus on speaking smoothly without pausing too much or overthinking. Because in the speaking test, if you speak slowly and you hesitate and you stop and you pause all the time, well, you're probably going to be getting a band 5 for fluency. The next thing you need to think about is, of course, your vocabulary. If you just use very basic vocabulary all the time, well, you're not going to be getting a high band for vocabulary. So what you need to do is learn a wide range of words and phrases. Like I said before, you can't just use very basic vocabulary. You need to learn some less common vocabulary and try to use these words in your speaking so they become automatic and very natural for you. Now, the next thing you need to think about is your grammar. So the first thing you need to think about is your basic grammar. Can you make basic sentences correctly? For example, past simple, present simple, future simple. Also, make sure you don't make basic mistakes. For example, subject-verb agreement, plural, singular nouns. After you've done that, then you can move on to higher level grammar. So you can use things like the passive voice. You can add in relative clauses. You can use by plus verb ing. The next thing you should think about is your pronunciation. And this is something that most students never practice, but it's something that you need to practice if you can't speak English clearly at the moment. So you need to focus on learning the sounds of English. So for example, can you pronounce your CH sound, your SH, your L, your R? You also need to think about things like stress, intonation, and just common endings like ed and if there's an s at the end of a word. So if you focus on all of these things, you're really going to improve your general English. Now let's move on to the next thing, which is perfect practice makes perfect. So a lot of people say practice makes perfect, but this is not true. If you just keep practicing again and again and again, but you're doing it wrong, well, you're not going to improve because you're doing it wrong. So you need to really focus on practice doing things correctly. Let me give you a few examples. So let's take pronunciation as the first example. If you're practicing your pronunciation, you need to make sure you're pronouncing words correctly. Never guess how to pronounce a word. Always check in a dictionary and make sure you're saying it correctly, because you might be saying it wrong and you don't even know it. When it comes to grammar, make sure your sentences are correct. You might be making mistakes with your grammar and you don't even know it. And if you keep making those mistakes, well, you're not going to get better. So you need to check to see if your sentences are correct. Think about your vocabulary. So for example, if you're using synonyms or less common vocabulary, make sure you're using those words correctly. Always check to see if the word you have used is correct and you're using it in the correct way. When it comes to fluency, when you're practicing, don't speak slowly, because like I mentioned before, if you speak very slowly, like this in the speaking test, well, that's a band 5 for your fluency. So you need to practice speaking at a natural, normal speed. I'm not saying you have to be perfect. No, that's not what I'm saying. But you should try to practice at a normal speed, because then when you go into the speaking test, it will be normal. It will be natural for you to speak at a normal speed. The next thing is in regards to shadowing. If you practice shadowing and copying a native speaker, try to sound exactly like the native speaker. So for example, don't use your own accent. Don't use the sounds from your own language. Try to sound exactly like the native speaker. Now, I'm not saying you have to do everything perfectly like a native speaker. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just trying to tell you that most of the time you should be trying to do things as perfectly as possible. If your pronunciation is 80% or 90%, that's fantastic. That's enough. However, if you're making mistakes all the time, well, that's a sign that you need to think about the way you practice. Now let's move on to number 3, which is have some phrases ready. Nobody is perfect 100% of the time, even native speakers. Sometimes you might not be able to think of what to say in a certain situation, and that's completely natural. It happens to everyone. That's why you should always have some phrases ready that you can use if something like this happens. So let's pretend you didn't understand the question in the speaking test. Well, you need to have some phrases ready. Another situation that you might encounter is that you need time to think. You get a really difficult question and you just need 1 or 2 seconds to have a quick think. Another situation you might encounter is you're just not sure about the topic. So again, you need to be prepared, you need to be ready. Sometimes you might want to correct yourself. You say something and then you realize what you said is not correct, so you correct or fix your mistake. Sometimes you might want to compare 2 things. So again, you need to have some phrases ready. So now let's have a look at some specific phrases you can use in each of these situations. So when it comes to not understanding the question, you can simply say, "Could you repeat that, please?" Very simple. If you need time to think, you can say, "Well, I've never thought about that before, but and then you start talking. Maybe you're not sure about the topic. Well, you could say, "Well, I'm not too knowledgeable on this topic, but if I had to guess, and then you start talking. You want to correct yourself, you can say, "Sorry, I mean," and then you fix your mistake. If you want to compare two things, well, you could say something like, I'd argue X is more beneficial than Y, and maybe you could say because, and then continue your answer. All right, let's move on to number 4, which is practice thinking quickly. One of the most common reasons why students don't feel confident in the speaking test is because they can't think of ideas. They get a question and they have the vocabulary, they have the grammar, but they just don't know what to talk about. And this normally comes from the fact that whenever they're doing practice, they practice doing things slowly. So if they get a question, they give themselves 10 or 15 seconds to think of ideas and then they speak. Well, if you want to be able to think of ideas very quickly, well, you've got to practice thinking very, very quickly. So try to do everything with speed. So that includes thinking of your ideas, and this also relates to writing as well. And another thing you can do is just practice responding quickly. So if you read a question or you get asked a question, train yourself to respond very quickly, to answer very quickly. Don't just sit there for 5 or 10 seconds thinking. No, just start speaking. Trust yourself and know that you're going to be okay. You're going to have something to say. So now it's time for you to practice thinking and replying quickly. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and for each one, as soon as I finish asking you, start speaking and speak for 15 seconds. Don't wait, just start speaking. Are you ready? Let's go. What's your favorite food? What's the difference between living in the countryside and living in the city? Where do you normally go to buy clothes? This is a great exercise you can do at home. Even if you don't know how to answer the question straight away, just say something. So for example, if you get a question you don't know, don't just sit there. You could say something like, well, that's a good question. Well, what I think about that is, and then you keep speaking. All right, let's move on to number 5 now, which is do mock speaking tests. One of the best ways to be more confident at something is to be prepared for that thing. If you know what's going to happen, if you know what to do, well, it's going to reduce a lot of stress and increase your confidence. But when you do mock speaking tests, there are some certain things you should do and shouldn't do. So let me show you a few right now. The first thing is you should use a timer and follow the correct times for each part. This is going to get you used to the real timing and the real format for the real speaking test. The next thing is speak out loud, not in your head. Speaking out loud is very different to answering in your head. And again, you need to get ready for the real test. And in the real test, you don't speak in your head. You actually have to speak out loud with words. So again, train yourself to be ready for that thing. Another thing you should do is record yourself and listen back. A lot of the time when we listen to a recording of ourselves, it sounds very different to what we hear when we're actually speaking. So make sure you record yourself, listen to yourself, see how you sound, and you can think about what you're doing well and what you're doing not so well. So for example, maybe you're speaking really slowly and you didn't realize that. Well, that's great because now you can focus on that thing. You can focus on improving your speed. Don't just do easy topics. In the real IELTS speaking test, you don't know what questions you're going to get, and you can't change your questions. So you need to practice doing hard topics, like, for example, art. A lot of students say that art is one of the hardest topics. Well, that's why you need to practice for that topic. The next thing, which we've talked about just briefly before, respond quickly, okay? Don't take a lot of time to think about your answer and then respond. Just respond as quickly as possible. Train yourself to think quickly and to respond quickly. Now, if you do want a real speaking test with a real IELTS examiner, you can book a test below and you get a band score with feedback as to where you need to improve. All right, let's move on to number 6 now, which is get feedback. When you get feedback from someone who knows what they're talking about, like an IELTS examiner, you stop having to guess. And from my experience, that's what a lot of students seem to do with IELTS. You know, they say they want a band 7, but they don't know what they need to do to get there, and they don't know what they're doing correctly right now. But with feedback, you're going to know exactly what you're doing well, so you can keep doing those things, and you're going to learn what you're not doing well, so you can fix those things, improve, and get a better score. Just guessing what you need to do can cost you a lot of time and money. I've seen some students take the IELTS exam 3 or 4 or 5 times before they decided to get some coaching. But if they had have got coaching before, they probably would have got their target band score on their first attempt. Now, you might be thinking, well, what kinds of things can I get feedback on? Well, let me show you some examples. One thing you can get feedback on is fluency. So, for example, are you speaking smoothly? Are you hesitating too much? Are you pausing too much? Are you using discourse markers? Vocabulary is another thing. So, are you using a wide range of words naturally? Are you using them correctly? Because to get a high band score in vocabulary, you've got to use a wide range of words correctly. And you also need to use some less common vocabulary. Grammar, are your sentences correct? Are you using a range of structures? Or are you just using very basic structures like past simple and present simple? Pronunciation, and this is something that most students never think about. They never get feedback on pronunciation. So, for example, are your words clear and easy to understand? Are you pronouncing the sounds of English correctly? Are you using stress? If you don't get any feedback, well, you're not going to know what you're doing well and what you're doing not so well. The next thing is timing. Are your answers the right length for each part? Some students speak for too long in part 1, for example. Some students don't speak long enough in part 3, for example. So you need to know how long you should speak for in each part. So if you do want feedback on any of these things and a band score, we can definitely help you with that. If you're interested, the link to book a speaking test is in the description below. Let's move on to number 7 now, which is don't worry if you make mistakes. You're not trying to get a band 9. That's the only time you really need to be almost perfect. For a band 7, you don't have to be perfect, and it's okay to make mistakes and not do everything perfectly. And I'm going to show you some examples in just a second. Now, remember that mistakes are how you learn. The problem is if you're making mistakes and you don't know you're making mistakes. If that happens, you're not going to know what to fix to get better, and you're not going to be able to improve, right? But if you do know what you're doing wrong, then you can take action to fix those mistakes. Now, let me show you some things you can do in the speaking test, and you can still get band 7. Let's start with fluency. In the speaking band descriptors for a band 7, it says some hesitation. So you can still have some hesitation and get a band 7 for fluency. For vocabulary, band 7 says inappropriacies occur. That simply means using incorrect words. So even for a band 7 in vocabulary, you can still use the incorrect words sometimes. And finally, for grammar, error-free sentences are frequent. A few basic errors. So to get a band 7 in grammar, you can still make a few basic errors. So if you have a look at these things, you'll see that you don't have to be perfect. So don't worry if you make a few small mistakes. It's no problem. It's not the end of the world. So I hope you can see that you don't have to be perfect, so don't worry too much. Knowing this is hopefully going to make you feel less nervous and increase your confidence. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to get the highest band possible. I'm just saying don't worry if you make some mistakes. Sometimes you can still get a band 7. So they were 7 tips to improve your confidence in the IELTS speaking test. If you want to learn to sound more natural in the speaking test, check out this video right here. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Take care and see you next time.